and more coming. I think it's 10:59 and the countdown. Fulani. And it's now 11, so we can start. It's snowing tonight, the silence of white, magical sight in its wonder. Blankets of fields, all is concealed, scars are all healed, wounds are covered. The flakes falling fast, shrouding the past. Who's first or who is last doesn't matter. It dresses the graves. Princes and slaves, the weak and the brave are all flattered. And we all fall down sometimes when our faith is undermined. But the gentle snow, so kind, sublime, reminds us there is grace, there is mercy in the grace of the design. It buries the bins, garbage within, veils every sin like a frosting. All motion must wait, business abate, all highways and bridges and crossings, cloaks every roof, elegant, smooth, quiet, aloof in its mystery, each twig, every tree, in white purity, clearly revealing its history. And we all fall down sometimes when our faith is undermined, but the gentle snow, so kind, sublime, reminds us there is mercy in the grace of the design. It falls on the church, hushes the birds, falls on all words that are spoken. It glistens and glides, swirls from all sides, drifting in tides like an ocean. High financiers, check out cashiers. Home, it is clear they are going. The sane and the mad, the good and the bad are secretly glad that it's snowing. And we all fall down sometimes when our faith is undermined, but the gentle snow, so kind, sublime, reminds us there is mercy in the grace of the design. Reminds us there is mercy in the grace of the divine. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Dean, and I started as occasional musician at Community Church of Boston back in the 80s, and in the 97 deepened my commitment and became sort of music director, and up to now I've slogged my way to being administrator as well, and MC for this beautiful gathering this morning. We're all home, and it's good that we're home. I just hope that nobody showed up at the church. Usually the ones who are the last to get the news are the people who don't have email or internet, and sometimes fairly kind of folks on the margins. And I hope they are well during this snowstorm, and wish them warmth and comfort, just as we can find comfort in that snow that is falling outside. And in that song about that, which is written by Tom Pacheco, by the way. I don't know if you know Tom Pacheco. He was with us in 2019 on Indigenous Peoples Day. Tom is half Lakota. His mother is Lakota, and his father is Portuguese from New Bedford. And he's written so many just great songs, and that's one for this moment. I love the way he changes the grace of the design to the grace of the divine at the end of the song. And we send our well wishes to Tom. I need to call him again. He's up in his years and pretty much homebound. And on these days when snow falls, I think about folks who are homebound. or who can't make it because they're in some facility, be it like Dick Crowley, who's in a nursing home. Dick, if you're joining us, we give you a big hug from far away. And Dick Kashishin, who's still at home. These are some of our seniors. In Mexico, they call them los grandes, which means the great ones. Los grandes is the elders. And the two Dicks, Dick Kashishin, Dick Crowley. And then I want to tell you about Judith Woodruff, who's actually still a member of our board, although she is also the Hebrew rehab institutionalized there because of a big stroke. I had a lovely visit yesterday with Judith and David Woodruff. I'm hoping they are joining us as well. I had also a nice sort of time of meditation during the Shabbat service that was happening there. A beautiful sanctuary right there in the Hebrew rehab. So just sending out this to people who are not able to be with us, and that would include also our members behind bars, like David Jackson, like I can't remember any of the other names, but some of them who have gotten out and who are with us in person. Anyway, that's a little bit of just background. We're home, and I have this incredible desire to walk you around my house and show you all my stuff, but I won't do that. But I will show you that I got to we got to enjoy pancakes that I put yogurt and maple syrup and peanut butter on top of. It's a benefit of being home and the comforts of home. Jennifer and I are presently attending two different Zoom UU services. Well, we're sort of UU, but hers is very UU. It's called Theodore Parker Church, and they're in the living room and we're in the dining room. Two churches in one house. The reason we go to two different places is a long story, which I won't go into. But another thing I'm enjoying is the sacred libation of coffee. Some of you know how obsessed I am with coffee, to the point where I became an importer of coffee. And I can share with you that this is my product that I sell at Farmers Market. You like coffee? I'll give you a free sample if you come to church, and I'll have you hooked forever on the best coffee on the planet. And the likes of Kelly, our guest this morning, if you're a coffee drinker, I'll send you some. That's another side benefit of being with us. Yeah. We were going to have Fulani Haynes and Michael Shea join us today, but for obvious reasons that we can't be in our lovely sanctuary in Copley Square with that beautiful piano, we have put them off till next Sunday, when our guest is Omali Yeshitela. In addition to incredible jazz sung by Fulani and played by the incomparable accompanist Michael Shea, we will have speaker Omali Yeshitela. Let me tell you a little bit about Omali. He's a longtime leader of the African People's Socialist Party, also known as the Uhuru movement. And it's really going to be quite an honor to have Omali with us. He was seriously persecuted, arrested, and their organization shut down for a while, and accused of being what's it called, unregistered Russian agents. It's kind of an ironic thing, seeing as a certain unregistered foreign agent basically owns all of Washington, D.C., and that would be the Israel lobby. And I'm sure they're rejoicing in what we are just totally disgusted by, which was that that press conference where Mr. 47 says, "Oh, we'll just take it and it'll be ours, and we'll develop it for real estate, and we'll make everybody go to adjoining countries, and eventually they'll scatter throughout the world." It's the most disgusting. If it weren't laughable and comedic, and I can't say enough, and I've already written letters and made phone calls and sent emails, and I urge you all to do the same. There's so many things to be just so angry about. The other one was about USAID, and I'll tell you a little bit about my personal experience with that, which is that, as many of you know, I have a 34-year relationship with some villages in El Salvador that I've visited frequently, and taken lots and lots of people on trips to extend our friendship there and to work together on different projects. Well, one of the projects was a scholarship program for vocational university students, and one of them, named Elsie, was in the middle of one of these programs. It's a baking class at a vocational technical university in nearby town of Chalatenango, city of Chalatenango, and she got there on a Saturday for the class, and they announced to her that it was closed until further notice. Why? Because of that USAID cut, immediate cut in funding for everything, until it goes through the courts and they find out if it's going to stick or not. Everything is shut down, and that includes also 2 nearby clinics near these very remote villages that are just suddenly immediately closed until further notice. Stay tuned. Hopefully they'll be reopened when people realize what a insane, brash thing is this closing. Of course, USAID has a little bit of a double history here. There are some very good things they do, like medications for HIV positive people in Africa, like research on a lot of public health issues, like what I just mentioned, just different vocational training and road construction. They're also an extension of the U.S. empire, and do a lot of shady things, like sway politics and elections in countries. And so, it's this much good for this much U.S. imperialism, but that's beside the point. And I just needed you to know about that as well. Couple of other interesting things coming up. Tomorrow night, we have our monthly JFK speech webinar, which is a speaker who talks about that speech in June of 1963. And we've had a whole bunch of just great people, and more coming up. Amar was just telling us about some of the things they've scheduled. But tomorrow night is David Swanson from the organization World Beyond War. And generally those are on every 10th of the month. But stay tuned to our website. Sometimes it's held on a different day, like July. We have it on July 4th or such thing. Also want to tell you about a wonderful in-person event that's coming up April 11th. 2 really magnificent speakers, both retired military and government people. One is named Dennis Fritz, and one is named Colonel Larry Wilkerson, who was here once in person, and we just really loved having him with us. And those 2 will both be here on Friday, April 11th. So join us for that. All kinds of other incredible events in our annual newsletter. Thank you, Crystal Rollins Jackson, for the great graphics work you do on our newsletter every 2 months. It's just so grateful every time I go in there for having a colleague like Crystal and for having a colleague like Luis Guzman, who's our cook and janitor. And I have to share with you this incredible joy, which is that we got word this week that Luis is finally, hopefully, at the end of his really difficult journey in over 30 years of getting permanent resident status in this country. It's been an immigration case that we've followed and supported Luis on because he's been our steady companion and guide and cook and janitor throughout all those years. 28 years he's been with us. And so this is just an incredible joy to share with you. And there it is. Hallelujah for Luis Guzman. And I could go on with the rest of our staff, but those are the two that I want to just point out before I take another little sip of sacred libation at home, coffee. Did you ever hear of Gilberto Gil? He was a very famous Brazilian pop star and songwriter of great renown and beauty. He became the minister of culture, and he he has a great quote which is about stuff like coffee, tobacco, marijuana. His quote is, "The difference between the medicine and the poison is the dosage." And boy, is that ever true about like tobacco, the sacred Native American leaf that is turned into a cancer-causing, killing thing by the corporate world. And same thing for just about everything. Um, we have, let's see, anything else to tell you about? Just to celebrate that Charlie tells us we had a magnificent peña last night. Peña happens every second Saturday of the month. And it's a Latin American style open mic inspired by the Chilean Violeta Parra and Victor Jara. And it's a chance for anybody to get up on the soapbox and say their piece, be it in song or be it in poem or be it in whatever you have on your mind, be it a diatribe or a story, whatever. And it happens every second Sunday of the month. And we had just a great one last night. Let's see, what else do we have? I think we have everything. Did I brag about every single thing on this table? Oh, let me show you this too. I'm trying to transcribe the words of Mumia Abu Jamal, who joined us in 2007, if you can see that, to receive our annual Sacco and Vanzetti Award. And he sent us a message, not by phone, but through a CD. And I'm trying to just transcribe it and maybe have Crystal put it on the wall with a photo of Mumia talking about community church and talking about his own struggles, a lifetime in prison as a radical journalist. And so I'm going to do one little song, and then we're going to invite our wonderful guest to join us. I hope I can find this song is from our friends Magpie. Greg Artzner, Terry Leonino, who join us pretty frequently, pretty regularly by Zoom from upstate New York. But these are the words of Ella Baker put into song. And maybe you can sing it along with me from wherever you are at home. It's very simple. Give light and people will find a way. People will find a way, I do believe. And the rest of it is just the same thing. You repeat the first line within each verse. Give light, and people will find a way. Give light, and people will find a way. Give light. I just tamed the key. And people will find a way. People will find a way, I do believe. Same thing for teach peace, and people will find a way. Teach peace, and people will find a way. Teach peace, and people will find a way. People will find a way, I do believe. Stand together, and people will find a way. Stand together, and people will find a way. Stand together, and people will find a way. People will find a way, I do believe. Give light, and people will find a way. Give light, and people will find a way. Give light, and people will find a way. People will find a way, I do believe. People will find a way, I do believe. Our guest this morning is named Kellie Carter Jackson. I want to show you her book, which I'm really enjoying right now. The part that I've had time to read goes deeply into some amazing stories of Black resistance and women's resistance and just resistance in general, which is what we need in spades right now and right this moment. I have just finished the part that talks about Haiti and Saint-Domingue, Hispaniola, where the slave revolt is just a remarkable story that is not told very often, and it's just magnificently told here by Kellie. And this book is full of stories, not only from history, but also from her own family. And it's a wonderful book. As soon as I'm done with it, it'll be in Community Church's library. And soon we'll hopefully get Kellie to come down and be with us so she can sign it for us right here and have it among a host of other books written by different speakers who have joined us over the years at Community Church. Kellie Carter Jackson is the Michael and Denise Kellen 1968 Associate Professor and Chair of Africana Studies at Wellesley College. Her book, Force and Freedom, was a finalist for the Frederick Douglass Book Prize and the Museum of African American History Stone Book Award. She is the co-host of Radiotopia podcast. Oh, I have to check out your podcast. I will do that immediately. This Day in Esoteric Political History is the name of the podcast. She lives outside of Boston with her husband and 3 children. Professor Kellie Carter Jackson, so glad you're with us. It's just such an honor and a privilege. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much, Community Church of Boston. It's so good to meet all of you and to see your faces on this cold and snowy day. I'm so grateful for technology that allows us to be able to meet. Even though we can't be in each other's physical presence, we can still gather in this way. And so I'm just grateful for that. I'm grateful that it is a Sunday, it is the Sabbath, the day of rest. And today I want to share stories with you. I tell people all the time that, I have a lot of jobs, but I really consider myself a storyteller. So I'm going to share my slides with you. Give me 1 second. There we go. And we'll get to the next to the next slide. So I tell people that I have 10 jobs, and I usually do. I pretty much do. I teach, I'm a professor, I'm a historian, I do a lot of consultant work, I'm a podcaster, I do a lot of speaking events, I do a lot of community work. I consider myself an activist. I care very deeply about all marginalized groups. That's a good way to like sort of put it all in one umbrella. And my work reflects that. I'm always writing and speaking and teaching about resistance and refusal and trying to tell the stories of those who have been without a voice and without volume and without value, and giving amplification to those stories as much as I possibly can, is what I really live to do. And so I'm happy, at the end, if there's any time for questions, to talk about the work that I do and the work that I just have a lot of deep passion for. But what I want to start out doing is by telling a story about my family. These are all stories that come from the book. So if you've read the book or read parts of the book, some of this will sound familiar to you. I'm taking from pieces of the introduction, pieces of chapter 3, pieces of the epilogue even. And yeah, we'll just get started. So this is my great grandmother, Arnesta Duncan. And when my great grandmother, Arnesta, was about 9 years old, she stepped on a rusty nail. And not long after, infection began to set in. Likely she contracted tetanus, a serious bacterial infection that can cause painful muscle spasms and lead to death if untreated. Her mother, Mrs. Mary Bullard, my great-great-grandmother, her mother, Mary Bullard, was frantic. Arnesta was her only child, and she was going to lose her if she did not act fast. Mary sent Arnesta to the only doctor she knew, a white man who lived in a big house on the other side of town. And the white doctor offered to help, but in exchange, Arnesta would have to live with him for the rest of her life, working for his family. Growing up Black and a girl in 1915 left her vulnerable in rural Alabama during one of the worst periods of race relations in American history. These were the detestable but predictable terms of engagement. Mary, panic-stricken and not wanting to lose her daughter to death, agreed. But thankfully, Mary's grandmother, and this is really important because I just found out a couple months ago, I didn't know what my ancestor's name was, and I found out that it was Martha. And I was like, oh, I've got to put this in the paperback edition of the book. So Martha is Mary's mother, and Martha's only child was Mary, and Mary's only child was Arnesta, and Arnesta's only child was actually my grandfather, Edward. And Edward's only child was actually my mother, Norvella. And then Norvella had 7 children. So, and I'm number 6 of 7. So the mold was broken with my mom. But Martha, thankfully, was Arnesta's grandmother, a former slave, and she intervened and refused the doctor's proposal. She picked up her ailing granddaughter and took her home. I imagine she went into her cupboard, but much more likely, perhaps her garden, and there she administered every natural remedy at her disposal. Arnesta survived, but for the rest of her life she walked with a limp. Whatever space she entered, whatever path she took, she was marked by a violent racial imprint. My mother told me this story as a child to explain my great-grandmother's limp. It was not until I was an adult that I realized how the rusty nail was not the root of her trauma. This story has always gripped me for a couple of reasons. First, Arnesta was a child, her mother's only child. How could a doctor refuse a dying child medical care when it was in his ability to heal her? He had abandoned his oath primum non nocere, first do no harm. Second, nearly 50 years out from slavery, white folks still felt entitled to Black labor and life in perpetuity. Clearly, everything was transactional to this white doctor. Built into the deal he offered was a lifetime of servitude and likely physical and sexual abuse. Sometimes I think white supremacy in America can be summed up by these 2 diabolical options: live a life in bondage or refuse and limp. To be Black in America is to live life with a limp. And my great-grandmother's outcome had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with power. The power of the white doctor to neglect and attempt to exploit a little Black girl who came to him for help. But my book is not about the white doctor or the millions of people like him. In many ways, We Refuse is about my great, great, great grandmother's response, her refusal. It's about her rescue to save my great grandmother, my grandmother, my mother, myself, and even my daughters. Her refusal was not just no, but never. And I love that there's just 6 generations here, and refusal not being no, but never is just so powerful to me. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what refusal is. Refusal is a forceful no. It is a no that is packed full of energy and meaning. We refuse is similar to Black colloquialisms such as nah or nope or not today, Satan, or my personal favorite, oh hell no. I was recently asked about the difference between resistance and refusal. For me, resistance is how one responds to white supremacy, but refusal is why. Refusal abhors oppression and insists on defining how humanity should be understood and treated with dignity and respect and decency. Nonverbally, refusal is a halting hand or a pointing finger waving from side to side or a powerful raised fist. It is a barrier that prevents oppressed people from being consumed. And while refusal can be enacted by an individual, as in this picture right here, at its heart, refusal is collective, which is why the sentiment behind the phrase, we refuse, persists among subjugated people and is a key refrain in Black feminist politics as well as Native politics. Black women have refused to be invisible or small. And this entire book consists of examples of Black women refusing lies, violence, theft, mockery, or second-class citizenship. It shows how our refusal denies whiteness and white supremacy its power and unearned authority. So, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about Black history. Since the 16th century, Black history has been a history of refusal. And last summer, I took my first trip to Ghana. I traveled to the Gold Coast to visit Elmina, one of the largest dungeons built by the Portuguese. And on a wall in a cell just adjacent to where they kept Africans who they left to die a slow death is a plaque. And on it reads, "We are the children of those who refuse to die. We are the children of those who refuse to die." From the moment the slave ships left the west coast of Africa for the New World, Black people refused to die. And some even forfeited their lives because they refused to live in the conditions created by their white captors. In the 17th century, Queen Anna Njinga of the Kingdom of Ndongo, present-day Angola, refused the terms and broken treaties of the Portuguese and fought for decades against the enslavement of her people. In the 18th century, people like Elizabeth Freeman, who upon hearing the Declaration of Independence read out loud, refused to be denied her right to life and liberty in the pursuit of happiness. As an enslaved person living here in Massachusetts, she took to the courts and sued for her freedom and won. In the 19th century, Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831 was a collective refusal. During the uprising, enslaved people killed nearly 60 white men, women, and children. They killed their enslavers because they refused to be kept in bondage. They killed white children because they refused to let them perpetuate the system by growing up to become slaveholders. Enslaved people refused to be enslaved, even when their efforts to gain freedom failed. Even Black children refuse. During the 1950s and 60s, the American flag was a symbol in the civil rights movement. During a sea of Confederate flags all throughout the South, the American flag reminded the nation that Black people were Americans. Here, 5-year-old Anthony was protesting alongside his mother for her right to vote in Mississippi. Turned away from seeing the governor, an officer attempted to snatch Anthony's flag from his hand. His mother called to him, "Anthony, don't let that man take your flag. Anthony, don't let that man take your flag." These are the stories of Black women and men and children who refused white supremacy. So a word on nonviolence. We refuse offers a fundamental shift in how we understand and talk about Black people's responses to white supremacy. Often, when Black people are up against white violence, society presents them with two options. Or you can be violent, like Malcolm X, or you can be nonviolent, like MLK. You're going to burn it all down, or are you going to forgive? Violence or nonviolence, these are the choices. And nonviolence is based on the principle that people can morally persuade their oppressor to have a pang of conscience or conviction regarding their wrongness. Nonviolence uses compassion and empathy and morality to compel another's humanity. But I take issue with how the binary of nonviolence and violence has controlled the praxis and narrative by which oppressed people combat their oppression. Nonviolence on its own is not expansive enough to rectify the harm that has been caused by slavery and racism. Promoting and celebrating nonviolence is the only acceptable form of resistance is also rife with handicaps. For example, while my ancestors' remedy for Arnesta might fall under the category of nonviolence, since no one physically harmed the doctor for making his proposal, my ancestors' refusal was complex, and it is too reductive to throw it in a pile labeled nonviolence. My ancestor Martha's refusal was fundamental to her granddaughter's survival. First, she refused the doctor's offer. Then she sought every natural remedy she possessed to stop the infection and heal Arnesta's body. She did not plead or bargain with the doctor. She did not try to convince him that Arnesta was a child or human. Her refusal, remedy, and protection transcended violence or nonviolence. She took the doctor out of the equation. The doctor had no compassion for the child. He could not be morally persuaded. And violence against him would have been a death sentence for them. But nonviolence would have also ensured my great-grandmother's death. White supremacy and anti-Blackness are always violent. And the constant refrain is for the harm to forget violence, forgive injury, and forfeit agency. Sisters and brothers, today we have more than two options. Black people need not choose between certain death or a life in bondage. We have throughout history approached such violence with an array of responses and refusals. So for too long, I think our only model has been that of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And many of King's beliefs have been diluted at best or perverted at worst. American society presents a whitewashed nonviolence that often speaks nothing of white supremacy, capitalism, or militarism. And I often find that King's beliefs were not wrong, but merely incomplete. They do not always encompass the full range of human responses that people engage in, particularly in the face of death. King's 6 principles do not address reparations, which may not be purely monetarily, but how do we repair the harm of white supremacy? How do people heal? Not after breaking a bone or stepping on a rusty nail, but after losing a loved one, land, wealth, health, or psychological trauma. And in a spiritual and secular sense, King's 6 principles do not address repentance. What does it look like to turn from the ways of an oppressor? What does it look like to relinquish power? These missing principles are what activists today are trying to navigate. Not how to employ Black harm for transformation, but how do we mitigate harm altogether? So today, nonviolence has dwindled down to marches. And when a woman, man, or child is killed by racial violence, people march. But marches do not keep people alive. Marches honor the dead. Marches are public mourning and not public policy. And whenever altercations gain traction in the media, pundits and politicians alike are quick to point to King as the model for doing protests the right way. After racial violence results in death, the media's question is, will the protest be peaceful? Or an even more egregious question, does the victim's family forgive the perpetrator? Marches, forgiveness, peaceful protests are all shorthand for callbacks to King. But nonviolence today means something different than what King intended. Now it is a performance of passive power, that which almost ensures that those in power never structurally change. White supremacy does not believe in violence, no nonviolence because it does not believe in Black humanity. To white supremacy, nonviolence is a scarecrow, and racists rest like crows on its outstretched arms. Nonviolence alone could never sufficiently frighten or endanger political, economic, or social institutions. So, a word now on violence. Violence is the engine of white supremacy. Violence is an entire ecosystem. Violence is a tool employed to harm, deny, restrict, neglect, separate, and deceive. Notably, it can have various ends. It can be used to enforce white supremacy or to overthrow a government. Violence is slavery and segregation. Violence is theft and hoarding. Violence is replacing the truth with conspiracy. Violence is rupture and separation. Violence occupies the space of a system, an ideology, a culture, and a language. Violence can take many forms, and Black people spend much of their lives, if not their entire lives, combating, addressing, avoiding, subverting white violence. And it is impossible to write a book that offers a critical analysis on violence and does not interrogate white supremacy as its lead interpreter and as its lead perpetrator. We demand that people of color remain nonviolent, but we fail to ask the most important question. Why are white Americans so violent? Why are white Americans so violent? I want to be clear. We Refuse is not about advocating violence. I'm encouraging readers to grapple with the causes and consequences of it and to think outside of the binary of violence and nonviolence. The refusals and remedies offered here today are not about revenge. The work of revenge is ridiculous. Consider this. Never have Americans ever heard of 4 little white girls being killed in a church service before, being killed by a Black man before a church service. Never have Americans ever heard of a Black man like Medgar Evers being assassinated by a white man in a driveway in front of his family. Never have Americans ever heard of a Black man being invited into a white church for a prayer meeting where they treated him kindly and then were gunned down by the white churchgoers. Never have Americans ever heard of a Black mob attempting to overthrow an elected government at the United States Capitol. Vengeance is a white imaginary project, and Black people are not consumed with revenge, but justice. And white people are not afraid of revenge, they are afraid of justice, because justice is more costly. Violence harms everyone, even white people. I tell a story in my book about my great-grandfather, James Price. He and his wife had 16 children together. That's right, 16 children together, and they lived in Darlove, Mississippi. They all picked cotton. It was the 1930s. And one day, while James was driving his car, a little white boy darted out in front of him and was killed instantly. The accident happened in broad daylight with many witnesses. In any other scenario, my great-grandfather would have been lynched on the spot. He and his family would have been exiled, if not violently attacked. James was terrified. But quickly, word spread around town that while James had killed this little boy, it was an accident. He and his family were not to be harmed. Even the boy's family defended James. My family said it was a miracle, only the Lord. The town said it was James' upstanding character and reputation as a good man. I suspect the truth was more sinister. James, Rosa, and their 16 children were cheap, reliable labor during the height of the Great Migration. Here's the thing, capitalism is also violence. It makes even little white boys who get in the way expendable. And this year, many white people and those who aspire to whiteness will find out just how expendable they are. My great-grandfather was not being protected. He was being exploited. The white boy who got caught in the cogs of capital missed a valuable lesson. In a white supremacist capitalist world, the boy should have looked both ways. Whiteness and capitalism are not compelled by suffering, but consumed with inflicting it. White supremacy at its core, in its symptoms and its indirect manifestations, is violence. And building on Toni Morrison's 1975 Portland State University speech, in which she said, racism is a distraction because it keeps you from doing your work, Sandy Alexander described anti-Black violence that arises from white supremacy as not merely a thorn in a person's side, it is also a suffocating knee on a person's neck. She said during the summer of 2020, she argued racism was so distracting, it deprioritized a whole global pandemic. She says racism has been so flagrantly murderous, it has absolutely no qualms about being caught on camera. In fact, it will pose for it. We Refuse focuses on Black people's response to white supremacy, and it reframes the conversation away, from the rightness or wrongness of nonviolence, and instead focuses on what works. I focus on Black women because I'm in agreement with the Combahee River Collective, which states, if Black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all systems of oppression. We Refuse examines 5 ways that Black women have successfully engaged white supremacy beyond nonviolence. So I study revolution, I look at protection, I look at force, I look at flight and joy. And I readily admit that all of these categories are not exhaustive by any means, but in We Refuse, I hope to uncover them as a set of possibilities among many. For example, in revolution, this is the Haitian Revolution, I look at how revolution is about forfeiture and a new beginning. It's about replacing broken systems with just systems. I look at protection, which I think is best understood through the efforts of the Underground Railroad and the Abolitionists, Black people who protected their family and friends and fugitives from the violence of slavery and the snare of slave catchers. I look at force, Black people who employed their Second Amendment rights to protect themselves from the violence of the Ku Klux Klan. And I look at flight, Black people who left, maybe temporarily, or maybe forever, but always in search of belonging. And lastly, I study the potency of joy. I contend that the opposite of violence in America is not nonviolence. The opposite of violence is the fullness of Black humanity bound together with joy. I chose these 5 categories because throughout my life, I have researched, witnessed, or experienced the utility of them all. Their impacts can blend into one another. Sometimes revolutions involve force. Sometimes flight is motivated by protection. Sometimes flight and force are joyful. Many will remember the viral footage of a brawl that took place in Montgomery, Alabama. I don't know if y'all remember this. This was a couple years ago at a riverfront park in August of 2023. A Black dock worker was attacked by several white men who refused to abide his instructions to move their boat. The white attackers shoved the Black man and began to overwhelm him. In minutes, dozens of nearby assailants swam in, helping the dock worker and landing blows in return, including one teenager who jumped from a boat and swam to the dock to defend him, and another Black man who swung a folding chair at white attackers to fend them off from harming more people. Within hours, the internet exploded with GIFs and jokes and memes and reenactments and even merch to celebrate Black resistance to white violence. One white man was dragged to the point where his Crocs became socks. My personal favorites were Fade in the Water, referring to the 16-year-old as Malcolm Phelps, and Aquaman, and a quote by Shirley Chisholm that said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. I recently found out that actually the folding chair was invented by a Black man named Nathaniel Alexander in 1911. And I thought that was hilarious. I was like, of course we invented the folding chair. Collectively, both in person and virtually, Black people were refusing violent treatment from white voters. Black people rejected ill treatment. They protected each other. They used force to stop their attackers. They ran toward trouble. And they celebrated, laughed, and memorialized Black refusal with relentless joy and mockery. Poking fun robs whiteness of its legitimacy. Humor undoes the authority of white supremacy. It reveals its irrationality. The lessons of refusal and joy were bound up on that Alabama dock. The initial response to an altercation like Montgomery is anger. Don't dismiss this. Theologian James Cone said, anger and humor are like the right and left arm. They, right and left arm, they complement each other. Anger empowers the poor to declare their uncompromising opposition to oppression, and humor prevents them from being consumed by their fury. A deep, nuanced conversation on the history and implications of white violence is overdue. We have failed to examine violence that Black people are responding to in their communities. We have dismissed the rock thrower, the looter, the graffiti artist, and the poet. Not all Black responses are violent, but not all Black responses are nonviolent either. And throughout history, Black people have employed a plethora of tools to combat anti-Blackness. And these categories do the work of expanding nonviolence and in some cases giving credence to violence when it works. Liberation is forceful, but that does not make freedom illegitimate. It simply makes it hard. My great-great-grandmother refused the metaphorical fork in the road. She stumped out a new trail for Ernesta. She rejected dehumanization. And understanding a different path forward means asking different questions and being willing to accept hard solutions. You may be thinking about the state of the world. If you're like me, you're thinking about the state of politics, you're thinking about Gaza, you're thinking about this new administration, you're thinking about Haiti and Sudan and academia and the climate and the state of our healthcare system, the state of our prison systems. And you might be angry. You should be. Anger is an engine of refusal. But our anger should never be left alone. Anger must be tethered to hope and joy, and hope and joy stem from a place of purpose and promise. Wendell Erdman Berry is a writer, a farmer, and environmental activist. And he argues that when it comes to fixing societal problems, people often want a solution as large scale as the problem. But rarely can any problem be solved in this way. Instead, he suggested what is needed is a solution but rarely can anything be solved in this way. Instead, he suggested what is needed is countless small solutions that can chip away at the core issues. But small interpersonal solutions do not satisfy Americans' need for drama. At a surface level, refusal and joy can feel inadequate. At best, it can feel dismissive, at worst, like salt in a wound. But refusal is not a mere declaration, it is a verb. And joy is not mere optimism, nor is it ease. It is a conviction that nothing big or small can be tackled without first believing it is possible. I believe in the small but powerful ways we can refuse and find joy to combat violent systems. Recently, I've been thinking about Martin Luther King Jr., perhaps because of his recent birthday, and people want to think, what would Martin Luther King Jr. say in a moment like today? And instead of sort of putting words in his mouth, I decided to use his own words where he says, these are revolutionary times. And our only hope today lies in our ability to recapture the revolutionary spirit and to go out in a sometimes hostile world declaring eternal opposition to poverty, racism, and militarism. And I absolutely love this quote by King because we have work to do. But I also appreciate what King was doing alongside the work. He was taking time to give himself a break, to give himself rest. I don't know if you've seen these pictures before. I think they're absolutely wonderful. You can Google Martin Luther King Jr. in Jamaica. This was him on vacation with his wife, Coretta, where he says, in Jamaica, I feel like a human being. And there you see him shirtless. You see him in the pool, relaxing, walking on the beach with his wife, Coretta, sitting in a veranda, having a lovely meal. He understood how important it was to take breaks, to get away, to replenish yourself. and then to get ready to get back into the fight, to tap back in after you've been replenished. If we're not careful, we will do this work and we will get burnt out. We have to find pockets of joy and reprieve and rest for ourselves so that we can continue this marathon of a battle that we are engaged in. It is not a sprint. So I need to close, but thinking of swimming pools, I want to leave you with my epilogue. And this is a story that my husband told me when he was in high school. He took a summer job as a lifeguard. And during his training, his instructors discussed what to do if they spotted someone that was drowning. If the person was panicking, they needed to be careful because a person who was flailing could drown a lifeguard by attempting to jump on them and even push them underwater. If the panicking, drowning person was bigger than them, it could be a real problem. The instructor's guidance was simple: let them drown. It is better to rescue a person after they've lost consciousness than to risk being pulled under. Once unconscious, they can be safely rescued and brought to the shore, and then a lifeguard or a paramedic can conduct CPR and resuscitate them. Let them drown. It seemed harsh, but I understood the rationale behind it. A panicked person is a danger to themselves and others. I think about this principle often. It is though white Americans are lounging in a community pool, propped up by all kinds of floaties because they cannot swim. And they fear someone, a woman, an immigrant, a trans person, is going to remove a device that allows them to float. And so they scream, they splash, they kick, and lose their balance. And white people fear the loss of their superiority, advantage, and safety. They are irrational. They do not need to hoard floaties. In fact, they could just stand up and the water would be at their waist. But they do not trust anyone. They are kicking and punching and flailing their arms in a panic. In a toxic political environment, I ask myself, how should we approach these people? Do we let them drown? What does that look like for democracy? What does that look like in a practical sense? Letting someone drown is a refusal to engage a panicked person. Many Black people know what rescue and resuscitation look like in a democracy. It is the work and activism that Black women do daily at our jobs, in our communities, and for our families. There is nothing good in America that can be accomplished without our labor and our intellect. And when we refuse, revolt, quit, leave, withhold, strike, boycott, or simply carve out spaces that deny the white gaze, institutions must concede. Allowing the drowning is the demand that white people must relinquish their hold on power, violence, and control. The warning before calling out to a drowning is let go, stand up. You are not dying. When America is rescued and resuscitated, then people will have to answer the hard questions. How do we engage each other as human beings? When Jamaica Kincaid wrote A Small Place regarding her fraught understanding and relationship with her native home of Antigua, she concluded by writing about Christopher Columbus's discovery of the island in 1493. She referred to the European settlers and slaveholders as rubbish, and all enslaved people as noble and exalted. In her mind, there was nothing to contest. Men and women who engaged in the practice of slavery were trash, and people who were enslaved and honorable were even morally superior. But when slavery collapsed, everyone had to reckon with their own humanity and the humanity of others. Kincaid acknowledged this. Once you cease to be a master, you are no longer human rubbish. You are just a human being, and all that adds up to. The same could be said of the enslaved. Once they are no longer slaves, once they are free, they are no longer noble and exalted. They are just human beings. White, Black, or Native, with slavery, there are no humans. For people to become human, slavery needed to be eradicated. And Black people were unafraid to act. They were willing to trade in their identity as noble and exalted slaves to be human. But too many white Americans have settled into their identity as rubbish. And for too many white Americans, it is better to be hated than to be human. The 1993 science fiction author Octavia Butler published her book, Parable of the Sower, which is about an apocalyptic United States that is ravaged by corrupt leadership, deadly plagues, and rampant violence, all in the year 2024. And she says in her book, drowning people sometimes die fighting their rescuers. Drowning people sometimes die fighting their rescuers. Black Americans and other people of color cannot risk their lives saving someone who is unwilling to recognize the harm they are causing. The wise lifeguard will watch and wait. And it can be agonizing, but waiting is not careless. The refusal is not so much a no as a not now. And when the hysterical swimmer grows tired and weary and weak and is just on the brink of unconsciousness, then and only then will the lifeguard rescue them from the water. In the chaotic world that Americans live in, Black people can pull in the heavy, unconscious bodies of extremism and hope that their revival from a near-death experience will be transformative. Or we can let whiteness drown in the violence of its own making. But when we refuse, it is in our power to determine how we can best preserve our lives and the lives of others. So finally, as I conclude, I want to return to my ancestor who refused and Ernesta who limped. Her limp was not the totality of her life. She lived, she loved. She actually married 5 times. She laughed. This is a picture of her and my grandfather. She left Alabama and she moved to Michigan. And she protected her family as best as she could. She poured into the lives of her and into the lives of my mother. This is my mother when she was 3 years old. Ernesta refused, and in her refusal, she found joy. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You gotta have hope when every card seems lost. You gotta have hope when you're double-crossed. You gotta have hope when every flower is dead. You gotta have hope even if it's just a thread. You gotta have hope when every star burns out. You gotta have hope, one raindrop breaks the drought. You gotta have hope if you still have one breath. You gotta have hope, there is a way out yet. You gotta have hope when the rest lose faith. You gotta have hope when you meet Satan's gate. You gotta have hope when you're terrified and scared. You gotta have hope when it's too much to bear. You gotta have hope. You gotta have hope. You gotta have hope through the unending night. You gotta have hope you'll see the faintest light. A whole lot of hope creates amazing things. The most sacred sunrise that you've ever seen. Oh, you gotta have hope. Ooh, you gotta have hope. A whole lot of hope creates amazing things. The most sacred sunrise that you've ever seen. Ooh.
Right.
Wow, Kellie, thank you so much for your beautiful address, and we urge you all to seek out this book by Professor Kellie Carter Jackson. And as soon as I'm done with it, it will be available in the community church library for any of you who would want to come down and borrow it. This is the moment we usually just have to mention that we need your help in the form of financial aid, if you will, in this our difficult moment, but we believe that we're almost out of the woods. We've been 2 years with our first floor restaurant space vacant. And we have a new tenant that's about to start their build out. And we hope that they will be open in the maybe early summer in time for the big tourist season in Copley Square. But in the meantime, we have enormous expenses around getting this tenant in place. And so any way that you can help us in the form of a check written to 565 Boylston Street, Boston, Massachusetts, 02116, and we'll put that in the chat, as well as going to our website, which is communitychurchofboston.org. And there is a PayPal function as well as a credit card function for you to help us out as best you can with whatever means you may have at your disposal. Kellie, I just wanted to ask you about something that I'm trying to organize, which is a program on a Sunday about the environment in academia right now around Palestine, especially, and the students who have been disciplined. We had a meeting at the church of a bunch of students and faculty from one of the nearby universities of which we're surrounded, trying to grapple with and organize around the environment around that. I just saw another YouTube, Chris Hedges talking to 2 MIT students who were PhD candidates and were expelled because of their Palestine activism. And I just wanted to get a sense of what it's like at Wellesley right now, as well as just your general impressions around why this
Academia.
sort of McCarthyism is happening.
I mean, it's not good. It's not good. And I've been in the past couple of weeks a lot disheartened by how I don't know if you've read the book on tyranny. It has like 20 different lessons for combating tyranny. And the first lesson is like, do not obey in advance. And what I've been seeing in academia is a lot of anticipatory obedience, which is colleges and universities are complying before it's even required of them. They are scrubbing their websites of DEI, of anything that, looks like diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're scrubbing their websites of anything that might look or be pro-Palestinian. And it's nerve-wracking, especially for faculty, because there was a time where tenure could protect you. You could have academics, free speech and all of those things. And now we're seeing people, even who have tenure, that are being pushed out of their jobs and not protected. And so at Wellesley, I can say we've been meeting with the administration, faculty's been meeting with the administration, students as well, to talk about how we can be protected, how we can not comply with a lot of the things that are going on, and that if we're targeted, especially professors for the classes that we teach, how is the administration going to support us? How are they going to protect us? How are they going to make sure, we don't get sued and bankrupted by litigation and all of these things. So there are plans that are being put in motion, but it is really difficult. And I think a lot of people are scared, to be quite frank, about what speaking out will do to them. And so mostly I'm not concerned so much for myself as I am my students. I want my students to be protected. I don't want my students, to be expelled or to be punished for the things that they're doing. And even more so, I want them to feel safe to be able to speak out, because that's their right. And we have a lot of work to do, And it's not just state schools that should be concerned, even private institutions like Wellesley. We've seen even at Harvard, a whole president was unseated. That could happen anywhere. If it could happen at Harvard, it could happen anywhere. So these private institutions won't save you. We have to be able to have coalitions that are built together that support one another, really, and do the work of protecting each other. So we're doing that work now. I'm a part of a couple of groups that are trying to help students that are finding themselves in really precarious circumstances, but it's not good. That's what I can say right now. But there are people on the lines that are trying to do this work, and we're hoping that our administration will be more supportive than they have been in the past.
Thank you. And let's all hold the line for free speech. And
yes, it's so
interesting
important. It's so important.
The special role of a place like Community Church is that where certain speakers cannot go on a campus, we say, come here and speak your truth. And it's happened numerous times. Mike Heichman is with us and would like to join us. Mike, hello.
This was an amazing presentation today. I'm blown away. I've been a member of the church for about 50 years now. Wow. And in the past, we used to publish many of the presentations. We're not doing that anymore. I want to share your presentation today. There might be others. How can that be possible? I think
it's on YouTube. Is that right? It's going to be on YouTube?
You can share the link on YouTube. Yes, we used to send out an annual transcript of one of the addresses as a fundraiser at the end of the season. But it's in this day and age, it's more a visual thing than it is a written thing on paper. But Mike, I will send you the link.
Thank you.
To be able to share it. Yeah.
Yes, please do share it.
And thank you for your work. And I've read previous books, and I'm definitely going to read this one. Yay. I don't want to rent it from. I don't want to rent it from Dean. I don't want other people to rent it from Dean. Buy it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I do an audiobook. If you like to listen to, I do the audiobook.
I'm a reader. Thank you.
Perfect.
Let's see. Anybody else? If there's nobody immediately, I want to go on to the next thing, which just an observation about an address we heard online at Community Church just a week and a half ago from Norman Finkelstein, who drew the parallel of October 7th in Palestine to the Nat Turner Rebellion. And how violent that was. Same thing with John Brown, but guess what? It was the first step. And I kind of like to also compare the horrific tragedy of October 7th to a pressure cooker whose steam valve is let out, and just the ignorance of most of the world about what was brewing inside of there, and what needs to happen for change. I mean, the effort at nonviolence before that, with the Great March of Return, where even within the confines of the gates and the walls and the prison, people protesting presented such a threat for Israel that they took pot shots and killed hundreds of people, and especially targeted extremities and legs to make Gaza this place where there's more amputees, especially of young people, than anywhere else in the world. It's it's like you can't counter such deep colonial imperial violence with only nonviolence. Sometimes maybe some people would disagree with that, but there's so many examples, and Finkelstein's comparison was really a powerful one for me. And this whole book is kind of about that in a way. It's like you need to refuse in many more ways than just turning the other cheek. Is that right?
I mean, I say this in, I think it's in, I'm not sure if it's in this book or my other book, Force and Freedom, where I say there is no form of protest that white supremacy will approve of. There's no form. So whether you are taking a knee or throwing a Molotov cocktail or doing a protest or setting a building on fire or doing graffiti or writing a poem or looting, there's no form of protest that the powers that be are going to approve of, that they're going to sanction. They want silence. They want utter silence. So if that is the case, right, if it doesn't matter if you are being peaceful or being violent, if all of it will be shut down, but that doesn't leave you with a lot of options. I mean, when you think about what's happening in Israel and Gaza, it's apartheid, it's violence, it's oppression, it's genocide. And you can't take a passive approach to that. You can't take an approach that I think is not going to be effective, is not going to get the people, the powers that be, to listen. And people are doing everything that they can to get people to listen and to change and to move. And that's one of the questions I've been struggling with throughout my entire career, is like, how do the powerless procure power? How do the powerful relinquish their hold, their control on it? What is the impetus that gets them to break in order to redistribute their power and their wealth and their access? It takes more than just the people who are being harmed. It takes everyone calling out the injustice. And we need more people to do that, to gather alongside their comrades and to say, no, we refuse. We refuse. This has to stop. And yeah, I don't have an answer. If I did, if I had a 3-point plan, a formula that could get everyone free, I would do it. But it's something that I grapple with all the time, is how do we find effective strategies that will overthrow, relinquish oppression? It's tough. It's really, really tough. But it is, no doubt, it is genocide, and no doubt it is violence.
I noticed that somebody put up the link to Norman Finkelstein's observations about Nat Turner revolt and October 7th. Thank you, Ernie. And
was there a question in the chat? I think I saw someone had their hand.
Let's look in the chat. If you find it before I do, go ahead and answer it.
Go ahead. Was it Karen?
Says, I have a question. Should Karen? I ask in the chat or raise my hand? Raise your hand, Amy Tai. Or here's Trina Jackson. Go ahead. Hi, Trina. Join us, please.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to keep my camera off because my internet's a bit slow today. But Professor Jackson, thank you so very much, so very much. And I had a question connected. I really appreciate that you are lifting up specifically Black women's activism. And as a Black woman, that's, really important to me. I had a question connected to a book that I'm reading. I don't know if you know about it, but it's called The Other Side of Terror, Black Women and the Culture of Empire.
Oh, that
And
sounds good.
one of the I can share the
Yes, put it in
title
the
and
chat.
link.
Yeah,
Yes,
please.
ma'am. I will do that. One of the arguments that the author is making, this is Dr. Erica Edwards, is she's talking about the way that Black women in particular our activism has been both a resistance to empire and it's been complicit in
Mm,
empire. And
mm,
she's using the example of, she looks at Black feminist literature
mhm.
as an example of that in pop culture. And she's talking about, she uses an example of the show Scandal.
Mhm.
She talks about Condoleezza Rice. She talks about Linda Greenfield, the woman
UN ambassador.
yes, that's right, in the Security Council resolutions. So I guess my question for you is, how might you respond to this idea of Black women being used
Mm-hmm.
as faces of US imperialism,
Mm,
precisely because of our dual location at
mm-hmm.
the intersection of racism and sexism? It's just a big question, but
Yeah, that
yeah,
is a big
thank you.
question. I mean, I push back on it a little bit only because I feel like I tell my students, and maybe this sounds cynical, there will always be hired hands. There will always be mercenaries. There will always be people that will take the bribe, that will sell out the group. There's always a snitch in a slave rebellion. There's always someone that will occupy that space. Even in the Holocaust and slavery, there will always be someone of the community that will undermine or short sell or sell out that particular group. But I'm always careful not to substitute individuals for the collective. That I think you will always be able to find individual people like a Condoleezza Rice, like a top government official that will be doing the bidding of empire or government. But that person does not represent the collective. They don't represent the community. They don't represent the overall desires of the larger systemic group. And that if we were to take women as a whole and take Black women's activism as a whole, you would find that those women are outliers, and that those women are often not representative of Black women in general. But in any group, in Latino culture, in Asian culture, in even Palestinian culture, you're going to find a mercenary. You're going to find a hired hand. You're going to find somebody that
Yeah.
is willing to take the bribe, willing to take a check. And that sounds really cynical, but that's just the truth of the matter. But I think we have to be careful because sometimes we can look to those people and we can say, see, now that means you're all wrong, or see, that means you can't do it. That I don't think that's invalidating. I think that is an individual versus the collective. And what I'm always consumed with is the collective and the community. How is the community responding? What does the community think? What is the bulk? What is the consensus around these ideas? And never to just sort of take one person as the vanguard. That's always a big deal for me. Plus, I feel like whenever you have leaders, if you ever have one person that's doing something, that's dangerous to me. Like a person can be assassinated. Malcolm X was assassinated, MLK was assassinated, Medgar Evers, JFK, they were all assassinated. Whenever you have leaders, people who are the spokesperson, I'm weary of that because I feel like, well, you can take them out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the group, I always want group-centered leadership because it runs contrary to to Western frameworks. You know, Western framework is take me to your leader. I want to know who you're, let's negotiate just one-on-one. We don't need me as this, just you and I. And no, that's not how this works. You're going to have to deal with the people. And so, yeah, that's how I would address that.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate just hearing your reaction, your response to, it's one of many arguments that she's making.
Yeah, and I'm sure she's got valid points. I mean, I haven't read the book, so I'm sure that there are valid points. But that's the only way I would push back, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I'll drop the link in the chat. And
I'd love to check
you
it
may
out.
know of this person's work. But thank you so much for everything today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Trina. I love that photo with all the potatoes and all that. You must be a great gardener. Love to.
I do my best. I do my best.
It's lovely. Wow. Amy Tai, please join us. Hello, Amy.
Hi. Thank you so much for your presentation, and thank you for this whole morning's discussion. It's fascinating, actually. Just this last piece. I have a lot to. I have a lot of thinking about that. I don't know if it's okay for me to just add that I have a different perspective about complicity, especially when it's from people who have been, completely marginalized and under the oppressive yoke, right? And that complicity is also survival, right? It's like everybody has always done. Nobody ever asks for the hurts that they have endured, and nobody's ever asked for their struggles, and nobody's ever asked for the really crappy patterns that they might have about, greed or like taking the check, like selling out. I think they're miserable selling out. So people do things to survive, and we don't know what they had to go through to be able to survive, and we don't know what their conditioning was. So I think every human being really is trying their best. There is responsibility to go beyond what it looks like, but yeah, I believe that there are no human enemies. I think the systemic oppression that we're all facing, and the internalized oppression, right, of internalized racism, internalized sexism, it's huge. So there's but my question was about something else, and I really appreciate anyway that whole conversation. When you talk about waiting for the drowner to drown, I'm assuming that I'm not assuming, I'm questioning, are you talking about like the entire system and the entire broken system that we're trying so hard to either reform or fix, and letting that go so that we can resuscitate from a completely new place? Out of the ashes, we create something beautiful and new. Are you talking about, how do you translate that waiting into our actions for the next weeks and months and years? Because that obviously we can't just sit around and wait as things around us crash and burn. But on the other hand, are you speaking, are you thinking of like this entire collapsing society and system and economic system that we know is absolutely evil at its roots, and has been built on evil, right? Like genocide and exploitation and greed. So
it's a little bit of all of the above. And I say that because there are some instances where I've encountered a group of people like, I'm not wasting my time. Let them drown. I am not getting involved in that, because I know that it would be futile to try to, like online, I don't engage in like fights with trolls online and people that want,
But unfortunately, of course, we know that when they're shooting themselves in the foot and taking down the system, that the people who are most vulnerable are going down first. And that is our Black and brown. And
absolutely. Absolutely. Let them drown is sort of both individual and collective, in the sense that it's like, I'm not going to engage crazy, panic, fanatical people. And at the same time, there are some systems that are just going to need to fail. Like, there's part of me that's like, y'all wanted this, y'all voted this in, this is what you asked for, some of y'all. this is what you're going to get. And you're going to see just how expendable you are. I mean, like, we saw that just when one of Trump's executive orders was about cutting federal grants, and people were like, what about my SNAP? What about my, food stamps? What about this? What about that? Wait, he doesn't mean me. He doesn't mean, yes, he means you. Like, and having people face that hard reality of like, what does it mean to have to reckon with the decisions that you have made? You've gone out in this deep water. Now you've lost your balance. Now you're panicking. Now you're failing, after we told you again and again, don't go out in that water. Don't go out in that water. Like, there are some things that I think people are going to be harmed by the decisions that they made. They're going to be harmed by that. And that's hard to sit with. It is hard to sit with that. But I'm not asking people to sort of like watch people die. I'm asking people to be strategic about when is the appropriate moment to intercede and to intervene, and like, what will that look like? That's going to be different for every single circumstance, but there are moments in which people really will have to face the consequences of their decisions, and no one's going to be able to bail them out, or no one's going to want to bail them out. And
unfortunately, the rest of us who knew what was coming and tried not to do that are still going to be affected, and the rest of the world who had no say in it because they
yes,
don't,
yeah. And that's, I mean, I know people that are like, hey, listen, I am trying to fortify myself as much as I possibly can so that when ish hits the fan, I'm a little bit more protected or buffered or whatever. But it's an ugly scenario. I mean, there's nothing that brings me joy about saying let them drown. But at the same time, I think we have to be honest about when you try to rescue a panicked person, you could lose your own life. You know what I mean? You can actually risk your own livelihood trying to rescue people. And I'm trying to think about what is the best way that we can preserve ourselves and be strategic about when we intervene and what that intervention looks like. And if that intervention is actually going to be transformative, or if it's just going to be, another buoy that's thrown and then, gives them a little bit more time. It's difficult because, it's so contingent upon certain scenarios. But it's something I just want people to think about, because I don't know about you, but the last 4 years, like, I've been really burnt out, like exhausted. And I have 3 young kids, and I got to raise them, and I got to give them joy, and I got to give them hope. And I got to be selective about the things that I am choosing to like put my energy towards. And so there's some things that I'm all in, and then other things I'm like, let them drown. I'm not engaging. I'm not engaging in that right now. Somebody else can deal with that. And I think a lot of Black women have felt that way, where it's like, hey, listen, we tried to tell you. I was just watching the news the other day, and it was, all of these Palestinians that had voted for Trump because they thought Trump was going to like do something better for them. And it's like, yo, you see his solution? Do you see his solution? Like, it's genocide too. Like, and, and then trying to tell people like, oh, well, now I feel bad that I voted that way. Well, drowning people sometimes die fighting their rescuers. And Octavia Butler was not wrong, but it's not an easy pill to swallow. I can tell you that, but it's something to be mindful of.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Sorry, I wish I could be a little bit more hopeful.
No. I think that everybody knows the analogy of the marathon is really important.
Yeah, the marathon is not a sprint. It is not a sprint. That is for
the rest of our lives.
We're in it for the long haul.
For the long haul, for the rest of our lives, really, for the rest of our lives. There's not a day where I don't want to be doing this work, but I also understand that because there's every single day I'm committed to this, that I have to find breaks. I have to go to a friend's house and share a meal and just find joy and find moments where I'm just doing things with my kids, like playing out in the snow with my kids, and just finding pockets of like ways where I can get replenished so that when I get back out there, I'm fortified.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're
Thank
here.
you.
You're here.
I have a garden. Hi, this is Falani. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much,
Falani.
Doctor. Thank you so much, Dr. Jackson. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I'm
Go ahead,
just
Falani.
I'm glued. I'm glued to your words and how you write is so beautiful. I'm a great grandmother, so when I go to visit, I don't have to talk to my daughter too much about, don't expose the children to so much TV and all the way, because it's all like little propaganda, because I've lived for so long and I see how it happened to me, my mother, and my other family members. You get drawn in and you get sucked in, and then the next thing you know, you're lost and you've been hypnotized. And they say, "Great grandma, what are you talking about?" So I try to gently speak to them in a way, to their mothers and fathers. Don't expose them so much to that. Give them other things to read to them, walk with them. That's so old fashioned. They don't want to go for a walk. But these kinds of things that we were raised on, it worked. It helped to have our minds focused on where the path that we need to take for ourselves, And so I'm going to get the book and I will read it to my family.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Happy that you've got that spirit. You ain't gonna let nobody turn you around. You know what I mean? I
Yes,
just love
yes.
that. I love you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
And folks, come next Sunday to hear Falani and Michael do our music. And Falani sing and Michael play piano. I can hardly wait for that. Let me read one out of the chat. Justice movements appeal to moral conscience as a strategy for addressing injustice, and this seems more challenging now because moral conscience seems less able to be engaged in this era of complete callousness and denial. Kelly, do you have thoughts about this?
Jeez. Yeah. That's rough. That's rough. Just moving a bit more to moral consciousness, a strategy to just injustice seems more challenging now. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that we've kind of lost a little bit of our ability to care, to feel. Part of that is because we're so saturated with news and information, and misinformation, that we're overwhelmed and we can't take it all in. And because we can't take it all in, we just say, well, then I can't do anything, so I just don't care, and we really have to get people to sort of like put a pause on the amount of information that they're getting. We get so much information. I mean, I don't know if you're like me. I listen to podcasts, I watch the news, I'm always paying attention, I'm in social media, and it's too much. It is too much. And I need to connect with real people. And I think, the Surgeon General talked about this, about how Americans battle loneliness, that loneliness is real, that we need to be able to connect with other people in meaningful ways, and not just over our cell phones or over even things like Zoom, but face to face. And so I'm encouraging my students in the class I'm teaching now to like form study groups, to meet up, to share notes, to like collaborate with each other. Like, you're not cheating, you're learning together. The classroom is a community, and getting them to rely on one another and look to one another for help and for assistance. If you miss a class, if you're sick, call on your classmates, use them as your tool, be connected to other people, reach out. Like, I think we've lost too much of our personal connection. Part of that is the pandemic, it made it too easy for us to be isolated. And those are things I have to do a lot. I have to take breaks. I've cut out I had 6 social media different platforms. I've cut out 2 of them. I'm working on cutting out 2 more and then another 2 more. I'm trying to be less on social media. It's a little hard when you have a book because the publisher wants you to, put your book out there and all that stuff. But I want to have more coffees and more lunches and more dinners and gatherings and moments where I can really connect with people and say, how are you? No, how are you really? What are you doing? You know, like, hey, can you come help me? Asking people for help more has been something that I've struggled with, but now I'm trying to ask people for help even when I don't need it, but I just want the community. I just want people to know that I care for them and that they're cared for by me. Like, and so that actually doesn't have to be earth shattering. It can be, hey, come help me pull weeds in my garden, you know, and we would chit chat. Like, come help me, you know, share some coffee that you have, you know, like we have to build personal connection. Like, because if we don't, then we won't be able to tackle any of this because we'll be apathetic. And I don't want us to be apathetic. I don't want us to not care about the world. I always also say too, like, find your lane, find 2 or 3 things that you're passionate about. Focus on those things. You're not going to solve the world's problems. You're not going to swallow the ocean. You know what I mean? Like, find the thing. If your thing is food insecurity, you work on that. If your thing is the environment, work on that. If your thing is for trans and queer people, work on that. Like, find your lane, find what you're passionate about, and work on that. We can't take it on all together, but if everyone is doing their part to do something meaningful for someone else, that's when you really start to see that incremental change. It feels small, but in the long run, it matters so much.
All right. Thank you, everybody who's been with us on the Zoom.
Thank you,
I
everyone.
wanted to just call out some names here that we're not together, but we're together virtually. Charlie Welch has been our co-host, and he's our treasurer. Kelly, of course. Amy Ty, thanks for joining us. Beatrice Green, oh yeah, Dorothy Weitzman, Ernie, H.A. Penner, John German, Jose Aleman, our clerk, Karen K. Fulani, we'll see you next Sunday with Michael Shea, Lynn Mystic Healer, Michelle, Orlando Espinal, Richard Burrell, Steve Walker, Susan Nye, hi Susan, and Tilly Ruth, one of our grandes, our senior members, and Trish and John German again. Thank you all for being with us, and there's another 20 or so on YouTube. So it's been just a wonderful morning with Kelly, and we're hoping you will join us in person sometime soon at our auditorium in Copley Square.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Stay safe and stay warm.
Let's end with this little song that I just learned. Brothers, now our meeting is over. Brothers, we must part. Sisters will be gone, but I will hold you in my heart. And we'll land on the shore, and we'll land on the shore, and we'll land on the shore, and be safe forevermore. Brothers, now our meeting is over. Brothers, sisters, we must part. Sisters, we will be gone, but I will love you in my heart. And we'll land on the shore, and we'll land on the shore, and we'll land on the shore, and be safe forevermore. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week, we hope, wherever you are on the planet, or if you can physically join us at Copley Square. Thank you, Omar, for doing our live stream this morning, and Charlie for being our sound engineer, and Kelly for your wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Keep refusing, everyone. Keep refusing.
Keep refusing. Gotta kick at the darkness till it bleeds daylight, says Bruce Coburn. Now everybody get out and shovel that snow.